I don't really know where to start with this. I guess I should start by saying my name is Steve and I'm 32 years old. I moved into my new house about 3 months ago. It's an old Victorian-style house built in the 1890s. The realtor told me a nice older couple used to live here before they passed away. Anyway, I live alone and work from home as a freelance writer. Most of my days are pretty quiet and routine. I'll get up, have some coffee, and write for a few hours. Around noon, I'll take a break, have some lunch, and catch up on emails or phone calls. After that, it's back to writing until it gets late. I like living alone. I've never been a big people person. I'm kind of shy and introverted, so having my own space is nice. The neighborhood here is really quiet too. My house is on a side street near the edge of town. There are woods behind my backyard. At night, you can hear crickets and frogs making noise. It's peaceful. But the other night, something really freaked me out. I had just finished working for the day. It was almost midnight. I was downstairs in the kitchen rinsing off my dinner dishes before bed. That's when I heard it. A child's laugh. It sounded like a little girl giggling, and it was coming from upstairs. I froze, my hand still halfway in the soapy water. Who could possibly be upstairs? I lived alone. All the doors were locked. I hadn't heard anything until that moment. My heart started racing. I stayed completely still and listened. After a few seconds, I heard it again. A single soft giggle. It was distant but clear, and it was definitely coming from one of the rooms upstairs. I got goosebumps all over. I turned off the faucet and slowly crept over to the basement door near the kitchen. I quietly unlocked it and grabbed the baseball bat I kept inside. With the bat clenched tightly in my hands, I began ascending the stairs. Each step I took made my nerves even more jittery. When I made it to the top, I paused to listen again. The upstairs was completely silent. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. Which room did the giggling come from? The two smaller bedrooms upstairs were both empty. The previous owners had used them for storage, but I hadn't needed the space yet, so they were bare. I had to check them, though. I decided to start with the bedroom on the right. I inched down the hallway, holding my breath. When I got to the room, I reached around the door frame and frantically felt along the wall for a light switch. I flicked it on, and the room was instantly illuminated. It was empty, just as I expected. No sign of anyone. I could feel my heart pounding. I crept back out to the hall and moved toward the other extra room. Just as I reached for the light switch, I heard another giggle. It was clearer this time, and closer. I gasped and dropped the bat, scrambling to pick it up off the floor. The giggle sounded again, louder. It was a young girl's voice coming from inside the bedroom. My mind was racing. Was someone actually in there? That's impossible. All my doors were locked. The windows have alarms. No one could get in. Full of adrenaline, I flung open the door and hit the lights. Just like the other room, it was completely empty. No furniture, no curtains, nothing. The laugh was gone. I didn't know what to do. My hands were shaking and sweaty. Had I imagined the whole thing? Maybe it was just the house settling or the pipes rattling, but it had sounded so real. I went back downstairs and tried to calm myself down. I made some tea and took deep breaths. After about 20 minutes, I convinced myself it was all in my head. I must have been tired and my mind was playing tricks. I laughed it off and went to bed, leaving all the lights on. The next day, I felt silly about getting so scared. It was broad daylight and everything seemed normal. I finished up my work and had a relaxed evening watching TV. Before I knew it, it was past midnight again. As I got ready for bed, I hesitated at the bottom of the stairs. I stared up apprehensively into the dark second floor. Suddenly, I heard it again. A quick, high-pitched giggle from upstairs. My eyes went wide and I broke into a cold sweat. It was real. This wasn't my imagination. I ran to grab the bat and rushed up the stairs, flipping lights on in every room. That laughter kept echoing, moving from room to room each time I opened a door. It was like a twisted game of hide and seek. When I got to the end of the hall, the last bedroom door was closed. That was the master suite where I slept. I knew the room was empty, but my hands shook as I reached for the handle. The laughing stopped. Just as I opened the door, I heard a whisper right next to me say, "I found you." I screamed and dropped the bat. Frantically hitting the light switch, I saw the bedroom was empty. The whisper sounded just like a little girl, right next to my ear. But there was nobody there. I didn't sleep at all that night. I went from room to room, turning all the lights on. I kept hearing faint giggles and seeing shadows move out of the corner of my eye, but nothing was ever there. I even searched the basement and backyard with the bat in hand, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The next 2 days went by excruciatingly slow. I tried to keep writing but couldn't focus. I was consumed thinking about those creepy noises. Where were they coming from? Who, or what, was making them? How could I get them to stop? The following night, I resolved to get to the bottom of it. I armed myself with the bat and a flashlight and camped out on the living room sofa. I was determined to stay up all night listening. As the hours ticked by, I struggled to keep my heavy eyelids open. Sometime after 3, I finally drifted off. I awoke suddenly to the touch of small, cold fingers on my arm. My eyes snapped open, and standing right there next to me was a pale little girl in a frilly white dress. She looked about 8 years old with long dark hair covering her face. She was leaning over me, reaching toward my shoulder. I gasped and sat up quickly, moving her arm away. The girl giggled loudly as I stumbled off the couch and backed against the wall. I was frozen in fear looking at her. Who was she? How did she get in? She stood there calmly, still giggling and pointing at me. As she lifted her head, my blood went cold. Her stringy hair parted, and I could see she had no eyes, just empty black sockets. She started walking slowly toward me, her pale, bare feet making no noise on the hardwood floor. I was paralyzed by sheer terror as she got closer. Her horrific black eyes bored straight into mine. She reached her hands out, trying to touch me again. I screamed louder than I'd ever screamed before. Just as her icy fingers grazed my neck, I blacked out. I woke up the next morning in a heap on the living room floor. Sunlight was streaming in through the windows. I sat up slowly, feeling sore and exhausted. Had it been a nightmare? My pounding head and the baseball bat lying next to me said otherwise. I can't begin to explain what I experienced in this house. I've since moved out and am staying with a friend. All I know is something inhuman lurks there. I can still hear that ghostly, childlike giggle echoing in my mind, and I never want to hear it again. I don't think I'll ever forget that night. It was a Thursday in September. I remember because I had just started the new school year as a freshman. Mom told me high school would be so much fun and that I'd make new friends and go to football games on Friday nights. But so far it kinda sucked. I guess I'm kind of shy, I don't make friends easy, and the classes are a lot harder than middle school. I'm trying to get used to waking up early and having more homework at night. At least it was finally the weekend. I could sleep in the next morning. That night I was sleeping soundly when something woke me up. I opened my eyes, but everything was dark and quiet. I looked over at my alarm clock at 2:37. It was the middle of the night. Why did I wake up? As I lay there trying to fall back asleep, I noticed a faint creaking noise. It almost sounded like my bedroom doorknob turning. That's weird, I thought. I rolled over to look across my dark room at the door. Sure enough, I could see the doorknob slowly rotating back and forth. But how could that be? Was Mom checking on me for some reason? No. The door remained shut. If Mom opened it to peek in, I would have seen the hall light stream in. This was freaky. I stared wide-eyed as the doorknob kept silently twisting left and right. It was like something on the other side was trying to get in. A chill ran down my spine at that thought. The house was locked up tight, though. Maybe I was imagining things. But the motion of the knob turning was unmistakable. After a minute or so, the twisting stopped. The doorknob was still again. My heart was pounding. I pulled the covers up and squeezed my eyes shut, trying to convince myself it was just a dream. Finally, I drifted off to sleep again. The next morning, I almost wondered if I'd really seen the doorknob move, or if it was just a nightmare. But when I looked over at the door in the daylight, the knob, which was more like a handle, was lower than it should be, about where it would have ended up after being turned back and forth. Now I knew it had really happened. I didn't tell Mom about it. She'd just think I was being silly. But that night I found it really hard to fall asleep. I tossed and turned, thinking about that slowly twisting doorknob. What had made it move like that? Just our old house settling and creaking, or something more sinister? Eventually I exhausted myself enough to doze off, but suddenly I was jolted awake again by a loud snap. My eyes shot open just in time to see my bedroom doorknob jiggling violently up and down. The door rattled against the frame as if someone was furiously trying to get in. This was no figment of my imagination. A loud slamming sound followed, like something heavy had thrown itself against the other side. I screamed and scampered back against the headboard, clutching my blanket. What the heck was happening? Suddenly it stopped just as quickly as it started. The doorknob was motionless again. My chest heaved as I caught my breath. Was I dreaming again? No, I was wide awake this time. Something was terribly wrong. Just then I heard footsteps rapidly approaching down the hall. Mom burst in wielding a baseball bat, looking around frantically. I pointed at the door, unable to speak. She rushed over and tried to calm me to find out what was wrong. All I could do was stare at the now empty hallway. Mom turned back and hugged me tight. Did someone try to break in? Don't worry, honey, I'll call the police. I nodded and sank into her arms, my heart still pounding. But as the cops searched the house and checked all the locks, they found nothing disturbed. No signs of forced entry. No one could explain the violent rattling doorknob. They chalked it up to faulty hardware or maybe the wind, even though it was a calm night. Mom decided I must have had a vivid nightmare, but I knew what I saw and heard, and I could tell Mom was a little rattled too. Neither of us slept well the rest of that night. The next day we went to the hardware store to replace the doorknob and deadbolt. I felt better having the sturdy new lock, but my relief was short-lived. That night as I lay in bed, the new doorknob started slowly rotating again. The deadbolt stayed put, but the knob twisted just like before. A few nights later, I was startled awake again. This time, the whole locked door shuddered violently on its hinges. The deadbolt held firm, but the doorknob jerked around forcefully. How could it still be moving? I thought replacing it would stop this. Terrified, I pulled the covers over my head, but I could still hear the metallic grinding of the knob twisting and rattling nonstop. There was no escape from this menacing presence trying to get in each night. What did it want from me? I begged Mom to let me sleep in her room. The first couple of nights on the floor next to her bed were peaceful, but the third night her bedroom doorknob began turning too. Her eyes widened in fear. We heard it twisting faster and faster as we held each other and sobbed. The next day, Mom had enough. We were getting out of that house. She said Dad could deal with selling it after we left. We packed up what we needed and went to stay with Mom's sister. I felt bad leaving Dad there alone, but Mom refused to spend another night. We got an apartment in a new town, and I transferred to a different school. I finally started sleeping through the night again. Mom and I felt immensely relieved to be far away from that house, but a deep uneasiness still plagued me. I feared whatever malevolent presence that had tormented us was still out there somewhere, and someday, somehow, it would find me again. Find me and finish what it had started. All because I had seen too much. I made contact with something I was never meant to see. There are things in this world we can never explain. Forces beyond our comprehension lurking in the darkness, waiting for their chance to break through, to let themselves in. That house was just the beginning. No lock can keep out true evil when it wants in. It will twist and shake and pound without end, for all of eternity until it gets what it came for. Until it gets me. I'm seriously freaked out by what happened last night during the storm. I don't usually believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but I swear something weird grabbed me when it was storming really bad. like lightning every few seconds and booming thunder. Of course, the power went out right when I was halfway through a movie. I figured a tree probably got hit by lightning or something and knocked the power out. I went to grab a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. I tried flipping the light switch, but the power was out. My parents were out of town, so it was just me home alone. I'm 14 and my parents finally started letting me stay home alone this year. I went downstairs to the basement by myself with just my flashlight to check the breaker box. Normally I hate going down there. It's dark and creepy with weird shadows everywhere from the water heater, furnace, and stuff accumulated throughout the years. But I had to be brave and adult-like if I wanted my parents to keep trusting me. I carefully walked down the old wooden stairs. They creaked loudly with each step as if something was following right behind me. I pointed the flashlight beam around the basement. The light reflected off spider webs in the corners, and I saw some piles of dust and dirt around the edges of the room. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I walked over to the breaker box on the far wall. I opened the metal door and shined my light inside. None of the switches had flipped to the off position. At that point, I knew I would have to wait for the electric company to fix the issue. Suddenly there was a loud crash from upstairs that made my heart skip a beat. What was that? I froze, listening closely. Had a tree branch smashed through a window or something? But then everything went silent again, except the constant roar of the storm outside. I realized I had to go back upstairs and check things out. Maybe a window got broken and was letting the rain in. I needed to make sure there wasn't any damage or anything. Taking a deep breath, I carefully walked back up the creaky stairs using my flashlight to light the way. At the top, I peeked around the corner into the hallway. Nothing looked disturbed as far as I could tell in the dark. Slowly, I walked through the entire first floor, shining my light around each room. But everything seemed fine. All the windows were intact. With my nerves still jittery from the loud crash, I decided to check outside. The wind and rain pounded against the house as I unlocked the back door of the kitchen. I pulled the door open and shined my light out into the stormy night. The beam illuminated the pouring rain and swaying trees in the backyard. Then I swept it over towards the side of the house. One of the big maple trees had a large cracked limb dangling above the ground, still barely attached to the trunk. It must have broken off during the height of the storm. That explained the loud crash I heard. I felt relieved it wasn't something worse. I was about to go back inside when suddenly the flashlight flickered. I smacked it against my palm, but the beam continued to flicker until everything went dark. Crap, new batteries my butt, I grumbled. Now I couldn't see anything outside or even back inside the house. I stepped back inside carefully, hands out in front of me, feeling my way along the counter and back towards the side door. As I slowly shuffled forward, I heard the floorboards creak behind me. My breath caught in my throat. I froze. Had the wind blown the door closed behind me somehow? That didn't make sense. It had been wide open just a second ago. But the creak clearly came from inside. Was someone in the house? Hello? I stammered. My own voice echoed in the darkness. Silence. I held perfectly still, listening intently, but heard nothing else over the sound of my thumping heart. I convinced myself it was just the old house settling or something. I felt along the counter towards the side door. My hand suddenly met empty space. I had reached the doorway. I stretched my arm out further through the doorframe, reaching for the wood of the door itself so I could pull it closed. But just as my fingertips brushed the wet surface of the door, something grabbed my forearm in an iron grip. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. A paralyzing cold seeped from the icy fingers clasped around my arm, turning my limbs to jelly. Whatever had me began to pull me forward, out the open door into the dark, stormy night. Terror seized me, making it impossible to breathe, move, or even think. In a final desperate effort, I planted my feet down and resisted the force pulling me. I felt my shoulder wrench in agony as I tried yanking my arm back. Suddenly, the ghostly hand let go. I stumbled backward, slamming the door and fumbling to lock it. I scrambled away from the door, bumping into chairs and walls in the dark. Somehow, I made it up to my bedroom and locked myself in the closet. clawing at the walls in search of the light switch. I flicked it on and off as if it would suddenly start working again. When the power didn't come back on, I collapsed on the floor, whimpering pathetically to myself. I have no idea how much time passed before I finally got the courage to leave the closet. Hours, probably. I managed to get some sleep curled up among my piles of clothes on the closet floor. When morning sunlight streamed in through my window, I was incredibly relieved. The power came back on later that day after the utility crews cleaned up all the downed trees and power lines. But I still have no explanation for what or who grabbed me by the door last night. Part of me hoped it was just my imagination in the dark. A bigger part knows deep down that someone or something tried to pull me outside into the storm, and that fills me with dread.